Fort Knox soldier never expected to see her wedding photos again, but a Good Samaritan did everything possible to get them back to her.
A Good Samaritan tells West 2 thoughts of his own grandmother flashed through his mind when he saw a purse snatcher assaulting a 76-year-old woman.
A Good Samaritan teams up with a police officer to save a man's life in Port St. Lucie.
Johnson News has a story of how they used CPR to beat the odds to rescue a man having a heart attack.
It's an especially sweet holiday for Rhonda Healy, who had her purse snatched and then returned, thanks to a Good Samaritan who took down the suspect at a Manchester, New Hampshire Walmart.
Let the cyclist pass, but then just moments later, the man staggered off his bike, collapsed, and stopped breathing. So she teamed up with other Good Samaritans nearby.
Between them and me, we were trying so hard to get him to breathe.
And while Nat doesn't like the spotlight, the family he helped insisted others should know about the Good Samaritan cop who welcomed them back to Eugene.
The term Good Samaritan. It is one that you are probably familiar with. Dictionary.com defines a Good Samaritan as a person who graciously gives help or sympathy to those in distress. The term originated from one of Jesus' parables. This parable is found in Luke 10, verses 25 through 37, and that is where we will be studying today. In case you have not been here for the past few weeks, we will be focusing this summer on studying some of the parables of Jesus. A parable is defined as a usually short or fictitious story that illustrates a moral attitude or a religious principle. Jesus loved teaching in parables. Parables are much like the illustrations that pastors use today. Jesus would use parables to help create a scene in the listener's mind to help the attitude or principle that Jesus is teaching to stick in the mind of the listener. The parable we will be looking at today is the parable of the Good Samaritan. So let's look at Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him, Jesus, to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? Have you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to the lawyer, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road and saw him. He passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bounded up his wounds, pouring oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? The lawyer said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do likewise. So what we see here is Jesus ended this parable with an imperative sentence. He said, You go and do likewise. His command here is to be a neighbor. But what exactly does that look like? In this passage, there are 3 examples. 3 of people who were not neighborly. And there is 1 example of someone who was neighborly. Now, when we think of who is our neighbor and being a neighbor today, we often think of the person who lives next door to us or the person who is sitting next to us right now. But does that follow what Jesus is saying here? As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 examples of people who were not neighborly, and 1 example of someone who was neighborly. The first example we see of someone who was not neighborly was the lawyer. Now, when we think of lawyers today, we think of someone to call if you end up in court or if you need legal advice. Lawyers today are experts of the law that we are governed and judged under. The lawyer Jesus is talking to is an expert in the Mosaic law. The Mosaic law were the instructions given by God to Moses and the Israelites. The lawyer knew the law. He knew the law that the Jews were governed under. That is why Jesus asked him to quote the law. Now, this lawyer, he was a good lawyer. Jesus was able to ask him, what does the law say? And this lawyer was able to provide the correct response. It's what you would expect. Just like today, if you call a lawyer on the phone and have a legal question, you expect him to be able to answer it correctly. This lawyer was spot on with knowing the law. But he was not so spot on in doing the law. When he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" he knew what he was supposed to be doing. He knew that he was not loving the people he was supposed to be loving. He was hoping that Jesus would answer with the people he was already loving. However, he had no such luck, as Jesus answered with this parable. Just like this lawyer, we often know what we are supposed to do, but are not doing it. We like to come up with excuses to justify ourselves. Like, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, or the ever-famous, "I'll pray about it." We like to come up with excuses as to why we don't help people more than we like helping them. I encourage you to not be this lawyer. Do not try to justify yourself. Be a neighbor. The second and third examples we see of people who were not neighborly were the religious leaders. The first person who passes by this man was a priest. The priests were seen as the holiest of men among the Jews. These are the people who offered sacrifices at the temple. And as part of their service, they are expected to love others. However, another part of their service and their priesthood is that they avoided impurity. And one of the ways that they would become impure is by touching a dead body. So possibly what happened with the priest is that he looked down and he saw this man who was half dead and thought he was dead. And not wanting to risk being unclean, decided to pass him by. Touching a dead body for a priest would mean that he would be unclean for 7 days. And being unclean would mean that he is unable to perform his religious duties. Apparently, to this priest, his holy standing, his religious duty was more important than helping the man. The second person who passes by was a Levite. The Levites were second in the holy line. They served in the temple and assisted the priests. They too would be concerned about being unclean. But another possibility of what was going through the Levites' mind is the Levites were very cautious. And it was not unheard of in this day, especially on that treacherous road, that sketchy road between Jerusalem and Jericho, for a party of robbers to go and a member of their party go and play injured in the middle of the road, while the rest of the party goes and hides in a ditch. And when some unexpected person would see this man who looks injured and try to tend to help them, that is when the robbers would jump out and rob the man who tried to help. The Levite would have known about this. So it's possible part of why he decided not to help. To the Levite, the risk of being unclean, the risk of being robbed was not worth it to help this man. The religious leaders passed by this man. To them, their holiness was more important than helping him. Helping the man was not worth the risk of becoming unclean or being robbed. Just like the religious leaders, we pass by those in need. We see needs that should be met and pass them by. Part of the reason for that is we are worried. Part of what we're worried about is that people will use what we give them improperly. We are worried that if we give some random stranger money, that they're just going to spend it on drugs and alcohol. We wonder if they are really in need, or is this just their part-time job they do to earn a little bit more money? We wonder, and that wonder is not worth the risk. Another reason we pass people by is that we are busy. We are on our way and do not want to be inconvenienced. To us, our worry and our busyness can get in the way of us helping a neighbor in need. I encourage you to not be a religious leader. Don't pass by those in need. Be a neighbor. Now, the example we see of someone who was a neighbor was the Samaritan, which to the Jewish audience hearing this, the term Samaritan would bring a sour taste to them. Much like if you are a Portland Timbers fan, the sour taste the term Seattle Sounders brings to you. The Jews hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans hated the Jews. To the Jews, the Samaritans were seen as villains. So to hear that the Samaritan is the hero in the story would be much like us hearing that in the next Batman movie, the Joker is the hero. The way this story played out is probably causing a few jaws of the listeners to drop. Another aspect of this story is in the previous chapter, in Luke chapter 9, we see a passage of a Samaritan village rejecting Jesus. Now, don't know if these accounts are connected. They're probably not, but it's still interesting to see that the person who probably has little to no idea of who Jesus is the one who acts the most like Jesus. The Samaritan went out of his way to help the man in need. The Samaritan was on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho for a reason. He had something that he needed to go accomplish. But when he saw this man laying injured in the road, his personal agenda went on hold, and he assisted the man in need. The Samaritan bounded up his wounds. He poured oil and wine on him, which there is no Rite Aid or Walgreens nearby. The bandages, oil, and wine were all part of his personal supplies. The Samaritan then put the man on his animal and took him to an inn. And once at the inn, he cared for the man through the night. When morning came, instead of sending the injured man on his way, the Samaritan paid the innkeeper to take care of the man until he was fully healed. The Samaritan paid out of his own pocket and used his own time to help the man in need. When he saw the man, he did not think about where he was heading. He did not think of himself. All he thought about was helping the man and making sure that he was taken care of. Just like the Samaritan helped the man in need, we should help those in need. It should not matter if it takes a little time out of our day or if it costs us a little financially. We need to help those in need. I encourage you to help those in need. Be the Samaritan. Be the neighbor. According to this parable, our neighbor is everyone. And we are called to be a neighbor by helping those in need. I know for me personally, I have done a not so perfect job at being a neighbor. I have passed by people in need and have done nothing about it. I'm not saying that we need to give money to every person that we see, but I am saying that we need to be able to identify people's needs and be a neighbor by meeting those needs. Meeting needs could be anything from paying for someone's meal, by giving someone the care they need, praying for someone, making sure that they have the care they need, making sure that someone's able to care for themselves. Being a neighbor looks in many different ways. During the Great Recession, when people lost their jobs, I love seeing pictures like this. If you are unemployed and need an outfit cleaned for an interview, we will clean it for free. This is from a dry cleaner in Portland. The owners of this dry cleaner saw a need. They saw that people were losing their jobs, losing their income. And then they knew that these people would eventually have job interviews, but they may not have the money that they need to go to that interview wearing a clean outfit. So what they offered to do is to clean an outfit for free so someone can go to a job interview with a clean outfit, giving them a better chance at getting the job because they have a better chance of making a great first impression. Being a neighbor happens in many different ways, but all those ways meet the same goal. They all meet a need. Look for the needs of your neighbors. Meet those needs. Be a neighbor.